All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to NASCA TV. Excited to have you all with us this afternoon on the official first day of summer. Hope it's nice and sunny wherever you are. I know where I am in Maine, it's actually sunny for the first time in about a couple of weeks, so it's very exciting for me. As you're dialing in, please take a moment to rename yourself and include your state or company name so we know who's with us on today's call. Also, if you have a second, drop any social account information in the chat if you'd like. We'd love for you all to be able to connect with each other and for us at NASCA to be able to connect with you as well. Again, welcome into today's conversation for an edition of our national webinar on one of NASCA's core strategies. Today, we'll be discussing becoming an employer of choice. I'm Kathleen Kelly, the research manager here at NASCA. We're thrilled to have you all with us today and have a conversation around this important issue for state governments. I'm joined by a distinguished panel who will be with us sharing their expertise and thought leadership. But before we get started, just a few quick reminders. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available up on NASCA's Knowledge Center in just a few days. And also during today's webinar, we encourage you and invite you to submit any questions or comments in the Q&A and chat feature. All right, well, with that, we're going to get started. We have a couple of polls as we get a couple of folks in and settled. Claire, if you could launch the first poll question. So getting started off here with, do you consider your organization to be an employer of choice? So choose the best answer here. We have yes, no, but we are on our way to becoming one, or I'm not really sure what you mean by employer of choice. All right, we're going to give folks a couple more seconds to answer that. Again, this is a poll question asking if you consider your agency or organization to be an employer of choice. And also, please feel free to elaborate on your answer if you'd like, if yes or no in the comment section there, we'd appreciate that. All right, give a couple seconds here. Claire, if you can close this out and we'll see the results. All right, so what do we got here? We have the highest percentage is 39% at no, but we are on our way to becoming one, followed by yes at 26%, 22% not sure what you mean, which is great because we'll get into that today's webinar, and 13% with no. All right, thank you everyone for that. We're gonna go into our second poll question here. Which workforce related issue are you currently most concerned with? So definitely pick one of these. We have hiring a qualified workforce, retaining those employees, marketing state government jobs, and maintaining a productive and positive workplace and culture, and other. All right, so we'll give folks a couple seconds here to fill this out, another minute or so. Again, with the other, please feel free to elaborate if there's another concern of yours, that's been bothering, that is, most pressing. Definitely let us know about that in the chat. All right, Claire, if you could close this out here and we'll see the results. Okay, see, at 38%, we have creating and maintaining a productive and positive workplace culture. At 21%, actually the rest of them had 21%. So hiring a qualified workforce, 21, retaining those employees was 21%, and marketing state government jobs. So pretty consistent across the board there, but the productive and workplace culture is definitely number one. All right, thank you everyone for answering those. This provides us a lot of great information leading us into today's conversation. Appreciate that. We're thrilled to have you all again to NASCA TV. NASCA TV is an ongoing opportunity to meet with thought leaders who are members of NASCA and engage with other states to address core issues affecting state governments across the board. I want to introduce you to our wonderful lineup of panelists. We have Alicia Hunt, who's the Division Head of Human Resources at the Arkansas Department of Transportation. We have Bob Lavigna, who is a Senior Fellow Public Safety, UKG at Ultimate Kronos Group, and Reed Walsh, the Chief Human Resource Officer at NeoGov, and previously the Deputy Secretary of Human Resources and Management for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Again, thank you all for being with us on today's webinar. I'd like to first ask our panelists to please introduce themselves and give an overview of their areas of responsibility and their respective state or company. Alicia, we're going to start with you.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. Hello, my name is Alicia Hunt. I'm the Division Head of Human Resources here at RDOT. I'm responsible for providing guidance and oversight for all HR functions, including recruiting, HR information systems administration, and all aspects of employee relations. I've been with RDOT for 25 years, and I can honestly say that these last 4 years have been some of the most challenging for us in terms of recruiting and retention, as I'm sure many of you have experienced as well. And I look forward to hearing the discussion today, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of good takeaways.
All right, great. Thanks, Alicia. And Bob?
Thanks, Kathleen. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. Excited to be on NASCA TV. As you heard, I'm a senior fellow for the public sector for UKG, United Kronos Group, and I have a great job. My role is to advocate for, promote, and advise on effective practices that enable government, including state government, to attract and retain talent. So while I speak and write about this stuff a lot, I'm also always listening and trying to learn. And I think my job is sort of the culmination of my entire career as a practitioner in or with government, including 10 years as administrator of the Wisconsin civil service system. Also was recently the director of the Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement. And we worked at the Institute with state and local governments across the country to measure and improve employee engagement as a way to drive organizational performance. So again, great to be with you today.
Thank you, Bob. And Reed.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Reed Walsh, and I am since January the Chief Human Resource Officer for NeoGov. It's a SaaS company that provides software to HR. Previous to that, I was in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 8 years, 7 of which were, a little shy of 7 of which were as a Deputy Secretary for Human Resources and Management. Just to give you some context in case I kind of, target too much one way or the other, but Pennsylvania was a state that went through a major consolidation. So we had shared services for all of our HR. So I participated in a project where we, under the direction of the governor, took all the HR staff that reported into the agencies and combined them into one shop to give HR services out. So, I do think there's a large distinction, as many of you know, between, managing from, a consolidated level, a shared services level and an agency level, especially when we're talking about the attention you can pay to employees kind of on the big macro level or a little bit more niche in the agencies. So I think that'll be a great conversation, having someone that's very focused on their agency at DOT and someone who worked in the shared services environment. So happy to be here.
All right, great. Thank you, Reed. And thank you all for being with us today to discuss this very important topic. All right, we're excited to dig into today's conversation on becoming an employer of choice. We're going to get started with a quick question on the overall theme. So how do you define employer of choice for state government agencies? Reed, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, in its simplest form, people want to apply there, they want to work there, and they don't leave. Those are some of the big headlines. I think that, as people who are looking to fill the seats, that's really what it means. But I think in this day and age, it really means looking at who's making up our workforce, who are their personas, and meeting them where they are, right? So there's not just one kind of level of, good benefits, this and that, because everyone has their own varied definitions of that. So I think being the employer of choice is really having that mindset that we are definitely dealing with different personas of people, and how are we communicating with them and supporting them through their moments that matter in their lifetime. For me, being able to do that is a big part of being an employer of choice.
Appreciate that. All right, Alicia.
This is a really interesting topic, because back in 2018, I was asked to serve on a committee here at RDOT to refresh our 5-year strategic plan. And when that project was complete, one of our actual primary strategic goals was to be an employer of choice here in Arkansas. that would be one of our strategic goals, right? You know, and ultimately choosing that as a strategic goal meant that we needed to figure out how to make RDOT stand out among employment options in Arkansas. Because like Reed said, we want everybody to want to work for RDOT. You know, we have facilities and jobs in every county of the state. So, you know, jobs are available everywhere. And in a lot of our rural counties, the state jobs are typically among the most desirable, or at least they always have been. You know, the public sector has a lot of challenges when it comes to being able to keep up with the private sector on pay. So we have to compensate for that in other ways. And so what being the employer of choice means to RDOT is that we want to be the employer that the best, the brightest, and the hardest workers want to work for. You know, we know that to make that happen, we must have an engaged workforce. We got to have good pay. We got to have good benefits, stability, and most of all, we want the people to know that we care about our employees. You know, we want employees and potential employees to know that we are the whole package. And that's ultimately, it's a magic formula. You know, it isn't easy to perfect, but, you know, we're working toward that goal every day.
Well, I love that. And I think, so maybe it's not just becoming, but also maintaining being an employer of choice. So I'm sure we'll get into that later today as well. All right, Bob?
Alicia, I'm looking forward to hearing what that magic formula is, because I've been searching for it for a long time.
Yeah, Bob, so are we.
You know, it's a really good question, because, you know, the expression employer of choice has almost become a cliche as organizations, including in state government, strive to achieve what is sort of this prized status. But as Reed and Alicia mentioned, as often is the case, defining it is easier than actually achieving it. So fundamentally, it's an organization where people want to come to work, but as Alicia said, they also want to stay there. So it's not just about recruitment, it's also about retention. And employers of choice, they do have a competitive advantage over other employers. And I want to reemphasize that this advantage is more important than ever, especially in government, given today's intense competition for talent and the challenges that public sector employers face in attracting and retaining talent. So beyond the definition, then the question becomes, how does a government organization overcome some of those challenges and become an employer of choice? Is it about money or lavish benefits? You know, as I've written and said, if government has a pay problem, it needs to fix it. We don't want to be competing with the fast food industry for talent. But really the long-term answer, it's about engagement, it's about the employee experience. Employers of choice are great places to work. And there's been a lot of research. We've done some of it. The UKG Great Place to Work Institute. Great places to work have employee-focused cultures that create a positive experience. Therefore, these cultures attract and retain talent who deliver for the organization and its customers. And Great Place to Work, research has shown that in great places to work, employees trust the organization as well as their colleagues. So of course, as we'll discuss, that's easier said than done.
Absolutely. Well said, all three of you, and I appreciate that. I think that's a great place to get started with today's conversation. You know, as we just talked about a little bit, the last 3 years have created a new world of work, which includes tense competition for talent, along with changing employee expectations. State government organizations continue to experience issues hiring and retaining qualified individuals. Today's workers have more choices than ever before. There's a wider range of choices of occupation, employee locale, industry, and work arrangements. One way that public sector organizations can increase their success in hiring and retaining top talent is through becoming an employer of choice. So obtaining that status of an employer of choice as a state government agency requires a thoughtful and strategic approach that begins with understanding what people value most when deciding where they want to work and understanding what keeps people there once they've accepted an offer and chosen an employer. Today's conversation will focus on how state chief administrators and their teams can utilize marketing, data, and a positive workplace culture to increase their efforts to turn their organizations into employers of choice. Now let's move on to more specific aspects of our topic today. All right, our first question is going to be for Reed. So one of the first pieces of this workforce puzzle is recruitment. So recruitment can benefit from strong branding. How can state government organizations strengthen their brands to help recruit the most qualified individuals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, with everything in government, you have to have intention. You have to have focused intention. You have to staff it, you have to care for it, you have to feed it, and you have to, get the mentality into all of your HR employees that are supporting it. So, I think that's really important. Building that culture, that brand really matters. And so how are you going to do that, right? Like with your employees, you're going to show them what the benefits, what the outputs of branding are. So when we think about brand is how the job seekers are going to perceive either your state agency or your state on a whole, and the reason why it exists. The key to that is establishing sort of what your brand is. Why do you exist? What's the message you want to give off? And the second part of it is marketing, right? Marketing is how you're connecting with those audiences. So you need to have the brand, super important. As important is what are you actually doing with it? How are you actually marketing, to those job seekers? So one of the things that, stands out when we were looking at some of the research is that right now, 75% of job seekers are looking for brand before applying, right? So that's pretty large. They're looking at, what do you represent? What's your feel? Am I going to be able to support the work of the organization? I think we all can know in our heads, we're thinking that we have a real advantage there because of the work that we generally do in the government. But kind of double down on that 75% of job seekers looking for those sort of things. We think about, well, who's making up those job seekers? And I don't know if any of you had the chance to read an article that came out in the Washington Post this weekend, and I'll put it in the chat, but it's behind a firewall, so it may not be super effective unless you belong to the Washington Post, but it was talking about Gen Z and how Gen Z has now officially been in the workforce for, I think they said like 3 years or something like that. And I had to look this up because I always forget, but as a reminder, Gen Z is 1997 to 2012 birth rates. The Gen Z seekers, they're more diverse, they're more tolerant, they're more socially committed, and they're also right now making up 1/4 of the population. They know what they want, and their influence on job seeking is going to be huge, going forward. So I really do think we're at this inflection point where we're going to have to be thinking about our marketing and how we're reaching out to them. And then one of the other points that always sticks in my head is that average job seekers look at your job postings for 14 seconds, right? So that even, underscores why you want to be very intentional and persona directed when you're writing your job descriptions, when you're talking about your agency and what it means for. So who do you want to be hiring? What are the things that are mattering to them? What are your personas of employees? And how are you making sure that you're advertising your jobs in that way? So maybe they'll hang on for like 15, 17 seconds and decide to apply. So understanding who your workers are, who the personas are, that's really going to propel your recruitment efforts. And the other thing is definitely, I don't know that we can continue to operate in an environment where we have one web page or one source or one look that represents our entire state, or even, our entire agencies. Within agencies, there can be really diverse positions. So I think utilizing and adopting technology that can help you as HR folks not have dependencies on IT to quickly set up web pages that may be a better marketing tool for certain personas, looking at those things that are out there in the marketplace, is really going to help. But for me, it's all about meeting the applicants where they are.
That's kind of crazy to think that you said 14 seconds. That's not very long. And
that's LinkedIn data, by the way, if anyone is interested on the source on that.
That's pretty crazy. Well, again, I appreciate that answer. Thank you very much. Now we're going to go over to Alicia. Once you've successfully recruited a quality candidate, get them to look at the job posting for more than 14 seconds. One of the next crucial steps is onboarding. Why is onboarding so important? And has your agency changed the onboarding process after COVID-19 and all the resulting changes in workforce that we saw?
Yeah, Kathleen, that's a big question. It really is. And a lot of what Reed said, it really echoes into this. Onboarding establishes an employee's first impression of your organization. It is absolutely crucial to starting things off on a positive note. If an employee has a mediocre or a negative onboarding experience, it really is difficult to overcome that initial perception. Onboarding sets the tone for the rest of their entire experience. Our onboarding process hasn't necessarily changed as a result of COVID but it has changed as a result of changes in the workforce, which you can say, you know, were somewhat sparked by COVID, but a lot of it is about what Reed was talking about with our multi-generational workforce. You know, we are trying to reduce the number of days from the application to onboarding process, because we found that if we don't move quickly, we lose the best candidates to other jobs. Like everybody has talked about, there are a lot of jobs out there, and it's if you snooze, you lose. You just can't do that in this competitive market in this day and time. And just recently, you know, we implemented UKG Pro as our new recruiting and onboarding solution. And, you know, and that covers a lot of the onboarding paperwork and associated process. You know, the good thing is we've received a lot of positive feedback about that and how easy it was. Our prior system, you know, it was good, but just not quite as quick and easy to navigate as the current one is. We're also constantly trying to improve our new hire experience. You know, we do new employee orientation training, safety training, compliance training, and we're trying to keep those things fresh and interesting, at least to the point possible when you're talking about compliance training. You know, those things aren't necessarily super interesting, but you got to try to make it fun and engaging, or they're just kind of like, you know, what are you doing? And another thing we do is, you know, new hire surveys after 90 days to get feedback from our new employees about their experience. And when we ask them questions all the way back from their initial application, all the way to how they're feeling today. And we use that data to identify pain points, and we make adjustments, you know, where we can. You know, we try to stay agile and ready to adjust if we start to see concerning data. And like one thing we look at is that first year turnover, you know, things like that. And if we see trends, you know, we try to act as quickly as possible. We can't always, but that's how we kind of handle onboarding.
Well, I appreciate that. And you know, one of the things we'll get to a little bit later on in this webinar is the data piece of it and how important collecting it is, but also utilizing it at the right points throughout the employee experience. So thank you, Alicia. All right, Bob, you're up next. An employee's experience at work and with an organization can make the difference of whether they stay or leave. Can you elaborate on what is involved in an employee's experience and the connection with becoming an employer of choice?
Sure, happy to. But first, I want to reinforce what Alicia said. You only get one chance at a first impression, right, Alicia? And Reed's data point, that 14 seconds, that, I agree with you, Kathleen, that's pretty striking. And if the job ad is simply the position description with a whole bunch of requirements and tasks, they might not even look at it for 14 seconds. So the employee experience, you know, it's another kind of trendy expression. It really just means all of the interactions an employee has with the employer that affect how they feel about the organization and the job and determine whether or not they stay or leave. The UKG Institute shown that for organizations that are certified as great places to work, that provide a positive employee experience, 50% less turnover. So there's a lot of data showing that the employee experience matters. And these really are sometimes called moments that matter. The interactions could be daily, weekly, monthly, annually. It could be only maybe twice, when the new employee starts and when the employee leaves the organization. But it really refers to every aspect of the employee life cycle, even before the employee is hired. So recruiting and hiring, onboarding, which you just heard about from Alicia, supervision, training and development, employee recognition, performance management, of course, compensation, benefits, workplace flexibility, which, as we know, is a much more important component now than it was 3.5 years ago, inclusion and equity, employee well-being. The organization needs to strive to make these experiences as positive as possible. And the result is you're going to have a more stable, more engaged, Alicia talked about engagement, and high-performing workforce. One analysis, not one that we did, but another organization showed that positive employee experience in those organizations that created a positive employee experience, times more likely to delight, quote unquote, their customers, 4 times more likely to be innovative, and 5 times more likely to engage and retain employees and be great places to work. So engaged employees deliver for the organization, positive employee experience drives engagement. And it's about these moments that matter. And an important point is, it's not just HR stuff. You know, everyone's job is attracting and retaining talent, particularly in today's very difficult working environment.
I appreciate that. I think the you talk about the engagement piece and the not, just being HR, right? An employee's supervisor, they're, it used to be cube mates, but they're, the people that they're on teams talking with about, maybe not work related stuff. I think it all goes into that engagement and the employee experience, which is so crucial,
As employees don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. We all know that.
We've heard that, yes. But a very, very important point that I think we'll definitely touch upon later on. So again, very much appreciate that. We are gonna go into our next and third and final poll. Claire, if you can pull that up. All right. As we talked about, Alicia touched upon this a little bit. To what extent do you use data during the entire employee experience? So as much as possible throughout the entire employee experience, a fair amount, mostly during the hiring process, a fair amount, mostly after employees are onboarded, and sparingly, if at all. So again, if you can choose the answer that best applies for your organization or agency, this is a question asking about how much and when you utilize data during the employee experience from recruitment to retire. All right, give folks a couple more moments here. All right. Claire, if you could post the results, that'd be great. All right, coming in at the top here, 39%, a fair amount, mostly after the employees are onboarded. That's at 39%, 28% sparingly, if at all. I think the next question we'll ask, we'll get into the importance of that and hopefully provide some good resources for folks. And then tied at 17% is as much as possible throughout the entire employee experience and a fair amount mostly during the hiring process. So again, thank you everyone for filling out these polls. I really appreciate it. All right. I'll post that and move on to our next question. So this is for the whole group and building off of that last poll question, as I mentioned, let's discuss the importance of data throughout the entire employee experience. So what recommendations and/or promising practices has your organization or the public sector employed to collect and utilize data? Alicia, you already hit upon this a little bit, but we're gonna throw it over to you. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I think some of you can probably identify with me what I'm about to say, but here at RDOT, we are data junkies. Honestly, everything we do is data driven. We have always used data in our strategic planning, but the business intelligence and analytics features we have available to us now in our HRIS allow us to use data to easily monitor things like turnover, even down to the individual supervisor level. Like, for example, if we identify a supervisor whose turnover rates may be increasing, that triggers us to look into why. And let's see if that supervisor could maybe use some leadership coaching or other development activities, or is it really not necessarily related to the supervisor at all? It's because there are market trends in that region where there are some new employers or, pay rates are going up, whatever it is, we try to get down to the reason why. We use data to monitor age demographics. We use it to monitor diversity demographics. We monitor exit survey results, new hire survey results, engagement survey results. We use data analytics in monitoring trends in employee attendance. We monitor data that could be helpful for succession planning and knowledge management. Things like we use data to identify positions and employees who serve in key roles who may be nearing the end of their careers. And that prompts us to conduct knowledge interviews with those employees just to try to capture some of that institutional knowledge. The possibilities are honestly endless, and I could probably talk for a day on how we, mine and utilize data, but ultimately we are a data-driven HR shop, and we still have a long way to go into achieving our ultimate data goals, but we're well on our way.
Yeah, absolutely. That is very impressive. That's a lot of data that you guys collect. So absolutely kudos. I love that idea of the knowledge interviews, right? Of making sure that it passes along, that it doesn't leave with the individual. So appreciate that. All right. Bob, we're going to turn it over to you. We caught you still on mute.
Sorry, I only do that 2 or 3 times a day. I was saying, nobody heard me, but I said, Alicia, you're a tough act to follow with all of those analytics and metrics. I heard somebody say recently, if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. And I think that clearly applies to attracting and retaining talent. And when I say something about HR, and I've been in HR myself for a long time, but we're kind of good at counting stuff in HR, but we're not nearly as good as measuring things. So, we can count the number of people we hired, the number of people who got trained, or the number of people who participated in performance reviews. But really what we need to understand is, are we hiring the right people? Is training making a difference? And our performance appraisals resulting in improved performance. So we really need to have data. We can't guess about this stuff, what it takes to attract and retain talent. I have a book here. I wrote a book about employee engagement, but I have another one here entitled 180 Ways to Improve Engagement. So unless you have some data, good luck trying to work your way through 180 ways to improve engagement. So what are we seeing in the public sector? What kind of data? Alicia covered a lot of the bases already, but for example, hiring. Time to hire is important, but it's just as important who you're hiring and who's making it through your funnel. Are you losing people who you really want to keep in the process because they might be the best candidates because your process is long and convoluted and user unfriendly? Mentioned diversity, not just overall numbers, but are you diverse throughout the organization, up and down, including at the leadership levels? Pay equity. We do a lot of work with our customers to analyze whether or not there truly is pay equity. Overtime's another one. Who's working it, especially, for example, 24/7 operations like corrections? Is excessive overtime creating pay inequities and also creating the risks of mistakes and even worse things than mistakes? And turnover, Alicia mentioned that. Not just the overall turnover rate, but who's staying and who's leaving. Alicia, you mentioned individual managers or supervisors, but are newly hired employees leaving? I heard someone say, and I can't confirm this, in a webinar, that 22% of newly hired federal employees leave within the first 6 months. Now, if that's so, that is a problem. Best performers, gaps by demographic groups, you need to drill down and figure out not just what the overall turnover rate is, but who's staying and who's leaving. And Alicia also mentioned engagement surveys, employee surveys. Collect data directly from employees. They're the ones who need to tell the organization what's working with respect to the employee experience and what isn't working, what they feel good about, what they feel not so good about. So keep doing the things employees are saying are working and fix the things that employees are saying are not working and therefore resulting in turnover. And what happens internally affects how people view the organization externally. So the best and most valid way to understand what you need to do to attract and retain talent is simply to ask employees for feedback.
Yeah, very well said. And I think, employees enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to be heard. Just simply giving the opportunity for them to speak their minds is always important. So
yeah, and regardless of where they are in the organization, what their job is, where they are in the hierarchy, everybody has a voice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob. Appreciate that. And Reed, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, and when Alicia was talking and she was highlighting the maturity of their data game and their desire for data, that is absolutely the most least surprising thing to me, coming from a Department of Transportation. You think about the people that work there, engineers and that sort of thing. And I think one of the struggles in government, state government generally, and I bet Alicia sees this, with her counterparts, is sometimes, who has the support, who has the ability, who has the systems, who has the funding to do it. So, I think when I think about the population that makes up NASCA, the impetus really is on us as leaders to be reaching across agencies, to be reaching across specialties, and really making sure that there is a focus on data. So if it's Department of Transportation and they're rocking something, let others know how to do it. give assistance, help them, because we want the Department of Transportation and their employees to have the same experience as the Department of Aging and that sort of thing. So I think we have a real challenge as these leaders across the operations to be conveners, to be sharers of information, and to reimagine how we're supporting the whole, and helping each other out so we can be recruiting for all the jobs. It's really important. And you also mentioned, Bob mentioned the ability to drill down. Alicia mentioned it too, right? These, when we're such big organizations, some of this data is really high level. You have to be able to get into it. It doesn't really tell a story if you're looking, you need to be looking at things more specifically. And what I found, what I had desire for when I was, in HR was more reports that were like, okay, here's the data, here are the things that we saw, and here are some of the things that we should be paying attention to. So who's on your staff? Who's looking at that? Who's analyzing it and bringing those things up to the forefront so we can be proactive, so we can have data, pushing out data, either if it's your customers, be leadership within your organization, or if you provide services to somebody, so they can always have it on their mind. And it takes a lot of resources and attention and sharing of information and training up across agency and department lines, so we can, raise the skills of those that we have. Because I don't know that everyone is going to be as open to, I kind of need to hire 10 people for data. Well, what do you mean 10 people for data? We need 10 people to fix the bridges. We need 10 people to, work in the nursing homes and that sort of thing. So I think we have a real responsibility to train up and to share thoughts, within or even across states and state government and what's working and that sort of thing. So I think that's a very big deal. The other, Bob touched on this about the applicant filters. One thing that I found was really interesting when we pulled data, through our applicant tracking system, and we were able to see like, who are we converting to the next stage of the job interview? And I thought that was a particularly compelling statistic, because, if we were bringing like 100% of the people over and we're like, oh my gosh, we're interviewing so many people. Well, maybe we need to be a little bit more specific in that job posting. Maybe we can narrow it down a little bit. Those are really concrete conversations to have with the business. Or if we were, getting 300 people to apply and maybe 2 were making it in, well, now we're asking our HR department to go through all those resumes, when really that work should have been on the upfront. Be more specific, talk more about what the qualifications for the job are, and, and just adjusting that so we don't have, any of these dramatic funnels one way or the other. And for me, because I was providing shared services, it allowed for conversations. It also allowed for conversations about, well, maybe we're not going to hire that person with the degree to inspect that boiler. So maybe we should think about, how do we support internal movement? What are our jobs? Here's another point of data. What are our jobs? Which of them need certifications? What's the cost of the certification? How many employees do we have that are already certified? Thinking about tagging our employees that are already within our system. In fact, our DOT had started some of those efforts, within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania when I was there. And it's really difficult. It's really hard to keep up with. But, I think we're all going to be crunched to be looking at our workforce that we have. Who are they? And how can we put them into other positions in the state where we have needs? And I think that data is going to be really important.
Can I follow up on that? I think it's a great point, because the expectation of a lot of new employees is they're not going to stay with their same employer for 30 or 40 years. But in these large and diversified organizations like state governments, we can provide people with opportunities to change jobs, but still stay within the enterprise, right? So they don't have to leave state government in order to do the next thing. If they know about the opportunities and they can access them, they can stay within state government and change multiple jobs throughout their careers.
And keep some of the things that mean a lot to them, because, my experiences in looking at it and thinking about where the sources were for our employees, it still is a very heavy word of mouth. My friend recommended this, and when we were pulling the data and, the Commonwealth, a lot of it was through employee referrals and that sort of thing. Or my mom works there, my cousin works there. Now there's an argument on the other side that we still have to keep up with the marketing because we want to be pulling new and different employees in, but it's still there, right? It still exists. So, I think that's an important point.
Yeah, and Reed, something you said too also triggered a thought with me. You know, you mentioned about the data, you know, who owns the data, who's seeing the data, who's interpreting the data. And, you know, one thing that we have found is we're trying to find ways to provide the most important data, those things that you want to highlight in the simplest form possible. Because, you know, if you overwhelm people with data, you know, even though we are an engineering organization, as things like, you know, like the bridges that need repaired or whatever. So, you know, we're trying to get that information out there to our supervisors that's in a digestible format that really highlights the pain points. And, you know, for us, you mentioned twice, I think, about, you know, having people who understand what the data is and having, you know, some dedicated teams. Like we have a dedicated HR information team that, you know, we didn't have in years past, but, you know, as important as the data is, we've been able to do that. And we've had the support from our leadership to have a team that's dedicated to just mining and developing reports and producing dashboards and things like that. So we're very fortunate in that respect.
You know, and Alicia, I think another good point for that is, you know, my experience has been there's always room if you make it, because there's always a process that probably needs to be leaned out. There's always something that we could be doing a little bit better. And it may be that, you know, putting some of those efforts in so you can have the fruit of 2 more open head count, you know, through attrition. I'm not promoting, you know, get rid of people's jobs through attrition. You know, being able to reconfigure those jobs. So, you know, continuous process improvement for us in these service organization parts of government is huge because, you know, we definitely need to be conscientious of our headcounts. It just is what it is. So we're going to have to improve our processes, make them better so we can open up people to be focused in those efforts. If it's marketing, recruiting, these things that traditionally government has really been, you know, it's been for other people to do and not for us to do. You know, I worked at PBS for 12 years, you know, before I came into state government, and branding was huge. I mean, we had huge marketing departments, huge branding departments, like, you know, and then you come to government and there's a lot of really good tries and a lot of really good professionals doing that work, but it's not a cultural aspect. And it needs to have a little bit more emphasis.
Yeah, I totally agree, Reed. That's a good point.
All right. Well, I appreciate all of that. We do have a couple of audience questions, so we're going to turn over to those. Our first one is, you know, and Bob, you kind of touched upon this, right? Employer of choice is, I think, one of those maybe, you know, fancy, shiny terms that gets thrown around and can be potentially, you know, diluted a little bit from just, you know, using it over and over again. So, you know, is there a better way to kind of get to this concept of, you know, including, you know, having better representation with folks, and just, you know, really making sure that it's an organization that, you know, represents, you know, the community and diversity and those kind of things. So I guess, you know, for you all, for everyone, all the panelists here, you know, what's maybe a different way to approach this same, you know, point, because it is a very valid and important point and concept, but, you know, without maybe potentially using employer of choice. So, you know, taking this webinar and turning it on its head a little bit. So, Bob, we're going to start with you.
Well, you know, as I suggested, you really need to go beneath the cliche. And, you know, I wrote an article which I shared to become employer of choice, become a great place to work. So a place where there's a high degree of trust, a strong culture, and, you know, you may not say we are, you know, you can say you're an employer of choice, but do you really have a strong culture that attracts and retains talent? Do people trust each other? Do they trust leadership? Do they feel they can be themselves? A colleague of mine used to say, we don't want to have to check our personalities at the door when we come to work, right? As long as our personalities are workplace appropriate. But to be a great place to work, and the Great Place to Work Institute has certified organizations of 60 companies, 60 countries rather, as great places to work. So they don't talk about employer of choice. They talk about a great place to work for all, everyone in the organization, regardless of where you are, frontline or in the C-suite. Do we trust each other? Do we have a strong culture? Do we have a connection between the work we do and the mission of the organization? Are we proud of what we do? If those things are in place, doesn't matter what expression you use, you're going to be able to attract and retain talent.
Appreciate that, Bob. Reed, we're going to toss it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best indicator of that is action, right? So, making sure that you're conscientious of your communication and being equitable in your communication, or celebrations, or, like Bob earlier used the word things that delight people. Like that's really, really important. And I think that's been a little lost. And I think sometimes that, government workers have poor self-esteem, and I'm saying that sort of tongue in cheek, but really like we feel like we always have to be defending our states against the people that we're hiring, and how much are we paying them, to do these really, really, really important jobs. But they're humans, they're people, they need to be seen, they need to have celebrations that represent themselves. They need to, if there's employee resource groups or things that are going to really engage them and things that delight them, things where they can identify themselves, like that stuff is really, really important. And you just need to do it. You need to, stand it up and, put some action into making your workplace inclusive. And a lot of that, when we're in these big organizations, is through communication, but it's also through training our managers and leaders. We are doing like going back to the generational thing again, but it's so true. We are in a really rapid change mode, right? And so many people are so heads down doing their work. And if you're kind of like not living with a Gen Zer or a millennial right now, like maybe you're not as aware of, approaches and some of the things that they're valuing. So I think you always need to be looking at your current managers and workforce. That's really where change happens. That's really where, education may be needed. And it's not because people are trying to not be inclusive in the workplace, but, they always need reminders. I think that's a really big place to be focusing in on information. What they may perceive as, indifference from an employee is actually, maybe just, a generational cultural thing, and I'm not the expert, so I'm certainly sort of making that up. But I think, I think educating the workforce about those intergenerational changes is going to be really important in the next few years.
Absolutely. Thank you. Alicia, if you'd like to take a stab.
Yeah, I would mirror just a lot of what Reed and Bob both said. Something that Reed said specifically about trying to I guess make things a little more fun, I guess, to put it in a nutshell, to make the jobs more enjoyable. And that, I agree wholeheartedly. The challenge for us, though, in the public sector is trying to do that under the eyes of the taxpayers and the citizens who see us doing those things. And I'll be honest with you, that's one of our largest challenges. We've tried things like, a little cookout at lunch outdoors in our courtyard or things like that. And inevitably we'll get at least one complaint, from a citizen that says, oh, I saw all these employees outside milling around. And I tell you that creates a challenge for us, is to try to balance that, the responsibility to our stakeholders, the responsibility we have to our employees, and trying to find that happy balance there. I mean, it is just a challenge. And but it's got to, you mentioned, or Reed, I think, mentioned about the, just maintaining these jobs because of how important, the services that state employees provide to the citizens are vital. And for DOT, you're not going to get from point A to point B without the DOT. And, so we have to find people to fill these jobs. And, engineers in particular are becoming a big challenge, when it comes to recruiting. And so, as a public sector agency, we have to up our game and try to be a little more like the private sector and some of the softer skills and the things that are going to attract and retain these folks. And, that's the, it may not be the employer of choice, but just be an employer that people want to work for in whatever way, even if you're not using that catchphrase.
I think part of the solution, and there's no one size fits all, is workplace flexibility where that is possible. The state of New Jersey, for example, last week extended its pilot program for another year to allow employees who can work remotely to work remotely for up to 2 days a week. Now, there's some employees who are able to work more than 2 days a week. But I think just as important in that policy is requiring the agencies to provide flexibility to those employees who can't work remotely. We sometimes forget about those people, but they're the ones who during the pandemic continued to report to their work sites to deliver essential services, risking their health and the health of their loved ones. And we need to celebrate those people and try to figure out how we can provide them with flexibility, even if they can't work remotely.
Alicia, I was thinking as you were talking how quickly I took off my deputy secretary for administration, or for HR hat, because things that you were talking about were always under the public's eye, right? And many a times I was in testifying at whatever in front of the House or the Senate about our workforce and get the workers back to work, and I'm like, well, 70% of everybody who works for the state was coming every day doing all those things. So absolutely agree. I think we do have a lot of things that sometimes influence the environment more than we give them credit for, where I think government's going to have to evolve. I think about scheduling, in our 24/7 facilities and how a lot of that's been seniority based and that sort of thing. And it's really difficult. There's not an easy answer. That's why we haven't really gotten there. But, this new generation coming in is looking for more. And I know our Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania was seeing huge washout rates, than before. And there are lots of things that influence that, right? Like maybe it's because broadband is coming to different parts of the states. There are more jobs available. There are things that are beyond our control that are influencing what's available to people. So again, like why we need to be, always looking at, how we do the best to provide the environment that people are going to want to come and stay.
New world of work.
New world of work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we have a couple of more minutes here. So we have a second a question from the audience. So what are ways to measure workplace culture? So looking a little bit into that data and how we measure it, but specifically looking at workplace culture. Does culture lend itself to more of a quantitative or qualitative approach when attempting to gauge it? So, and I think, Reed, you touched upon this a little bit with your answer. But panelists, I'll open it up to you guys if you would like to answer this.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely surveyed people, and I think, the answers are sometimes sort of qualitative in nature, but the data shows a pattern, right? It really does. And, and I think Bob with the Great Place to Work, can show a lot, but I think employee surveys are huge. They're really important. To drill down on the data, where are you seeing pockets of things going on? That's going to be huge for your, your ability to assess issues. Alicia brought this up before. I'm sure Bob sees all kinds of interesting things come in when with the Great Place to Work survey, and there's a lot of good data out of that.
Yeah, and it varies from organization to organization, and even within the same organization. I heard someone say that culture isn't what you hear in a meeting. It's what people say in the parking lot. And that's why it's important to reach out to employees. And it can be a multiple step process. Surveying employees, you find out what employees think, but then you have to have some conversations, focus groups, listening sessions to figure out not just what employees said, but why they said what they said, to really get at whether or not there's a trusting culture. The Great Place to Work survey is called a trust index, to assess the level of trust, but then drill down, have conversations. There's going to be variability across organizations, within the same organization, even at the manager level. So to go back to the theme of this, one of the themes here, it's about data. So yeah, you can measure this stuff. When I was in graduate school, they used to say, if it exists, it can be measured. And that's true of culture as well.
Well, and what's saying culture eats policy for breakfast?
Or lunch or dinner or Sunday.
Yeah, and I would echo all those comments as well. And for us, like our employee engagement surveys, for example, they're done anonymously, so to try to encourage employees to be honest about their feedback. And we have an entire section of our employee engagement survey dedicated to culture, and we do ask very specific questions. Do you trust your manager? Do you believe your manager cares about you as a person? And as well as just other things about interaction with teammates, and multiple questions that are geared specifically at helping us identify pain points in culture, whether employees feel valued, whether they feel like they're contributing and making a difference, or being given the opportunity to contribute. And all of that's very important data that we use.
All right. I appreciate that. We have a couple minutes left here. So I want to do one last quick question here for you all. So what is your one key takeaway from today's conversation? So this is your golden nugget. What would you like people to take away from this conversation on, becoming an employer of choice, or, a different term for employer of choice, but, what is your golden nugget, your key takeaways? So Alicia, sorry about this, but we're going to start with you here.
Sure, no problem. It's honestly, it's comforting to hear that we're kind of all in the same boat. We're all facing similar challenges. The bottom line is we all need qualified people. We're all competing for the same workforce. We're competing with private sector organizations that have way more agility than we do, especially when it comes to raising salaries and reacting to market conditions much faster than we can in the public sector. We all have legislators and citizens that we have to answer to. So, just hearing this from everybody, and I appreciate being able to hear from others about the strategies that they've implemented or that they've seen work in other organizations. And I think we can all learn from each other. We all don't have to reinvent the wheel each time something new comes up. And that's where forums like this are great, because if you can learn from something someone else is doing, to me, that's a very valuable tool.
Appreciate that. Bob?
Once again, Alicia, you're a tough act to follow. 2 points. The one I made earlier, which is what happens internally affects not only your ability to retain people, but also how people outside the organization view the organization. So if it's recruitment and retention, you have to create a strong, positive employee experience and culture. That's going to enable you to keep the people you want to keep. And it's also going to enable you to bring people in who want to work in a great place to work. So it's about the culture and it's about data, understanding what's working and what you need to do better.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Reed?
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that is going to be really, if you're not already doing, it's really important, is to make sure you're being sticky with your applicants, right? Because, if you do have a lot of people applying for jobs, but maybe you were only taking X, Y, and Z number and they just got cut off, how are you reaching them again? How are you keeping them posted on things that are going on? So the ability to just recruitment and marketing is huge. It's going to have to be a thing that we do. And I think it's not just once somebody's come in, they didn't get the job, we don't consider them to be a candidate anymore until they reapply. What are we doing in the interim to make sure they're still engaged with government and they're keeping up on, maybe we're doing enhanced benefits, maybe we're doing something to improve the culture, making sure we're keeping up on that and treating those people who have touched our system, like they're still on the job hunt with us.
Those are all very good points. I appreciate it. All right. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today, Bob, Alicia, and Reed. We really appreciate all the work that you brought into today's conversation. Thank you so much. We very much appreciate your time and your insights. I think this was a great conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us here at NASCA TV. This webinar recording will be up on the Knowledge Center in just a few days. And thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all for being with us today. We really appreciate it.